It has been called the best bikepacking route in Europe, possibly the world. Roughly 700 kilometres from Turin to Nice through the Alps, mixing classic road climbs with rough jeep roads blasted through the rock by the military, leaving very rough gravel sections. Roughly a third is like that. In this I'll be talking to the man behind the Torino Nice Rally, James Olsen. It's a mix of practical bike porn questions for people who hope to ride the route and more discursive chat which I hope will interest anyone who's into endurance events, especially cycling. We chatted at the start of June 2022 over Zoom, and the audio quality could have been better, but stay with it and your ears will tune in as mine did.
I guess it was never set out to become a big event. Well, I don't know if it really counts as a big event. It was never set out to, I never thought it was going to have the level of interest that it got. Rising and just very grateful, really.
There must be a responsibility there as well, though, because now you're administering this whole thing and you want it to work in a good way.
Yeah, that's right. The first year was really going to be a large group ride that turned into a bigger group ride than I expected. And then very quickly realised there's a responsibility for a whole load of situations that you wouldn't really have to worry about for a group ride with friends. If there's people coming into the event and they don't know what they're expecting, or basically if accidents happen, what then happens? There's some responsibilities there that's what certainly wasn't expecting or predicting at the start, but you feel a responsibility for people are investing their holiday time and a lot of planning and preparation into this ride, and you want it to be a great experience for them. And there's so many routes that people can go and do, but it's great to hear the feedback from riders. They enjoy it. The route seems to be as rewarding as this is hard for people. So yeah, it's good.
As we speak, we don't know who has got through the ballot. But let's go back to how it began. It was 2015, wasn't it, that you did the ride for the first time and came up with a route not dissimilar to what people will be riding in years to come?
We'd ridden Geneva to Nice on road bikes and mountain bikes, and I've done some touring in that general area, passing through either side around Briançon generally before. So we just wanted to explore some of the military roads that were showing up on maps and seemed to be possible to link them up with some of the famous road climbs in the Alps. So we just went out there with a number of routes on the GPS thinking, let's see how it goes for the first few days, see where we end up, and then we'll decide which route to take as we get there. And just really enjoyed that way of riding, not knowing which route we would take, or having to think a little bit about how much time we were spending on a section and how that would then work out to give us more or less time later on. It just made the route a little bit more involving. It felt like we were getting the maps out on a regular basis and checking where we were in our progress. And that gave the idea for having route options on the ride in future. But as it was at the time, we weren't really planning it to be an event. It was just simply a case of, how does this type of riding work out? We're going to be off-road half the time, we're going to be on the road half the time. Will we want to be on-road more often? Will we want to try and find more of these tracks if we can? Let's just see how it goes.
Did you set out to turn this into an event? Or once you'd got back and you'd got this route, or did it just kind of happen?
Yeah, we had some interest in the routes and from the photographs. So I think it was really from there I thought, actually, there's quite a few people are interested in this. And it was just a case of a Sunday when I wanted to go out riding. It was raining and I was looking at the photos online and just thought, well, if this was going to be an event, somebody suggested, would it be good for a group ride? And I mentioned that Andy and I really enjoyed the off-road, the gravel sections, the high altitudes or military tracks, because we found gravel riding is great for just social riding. You can ride alongside each other, chatting, off-road, away from the cars, but the trails aren't so technical like mountain biking. You're having to really concentrate on the terrain. So we really enjoyed that. And I think it was the case of riders suggesting maybe getting together to do a group ride on that, and then that rainy Sunday thinking, well, if it was going to be a group ride, how would you do it? So you start playing around with a free website creation tool. I mean, the website that's currently up came from that that basic website creation that day, and it's I've done virtually, I've updated it since, but not tried to make it into sort of formal or official, very polished. So that's just where it came from.
Why does it appeal, do you think, this route? Why does it appeal as a route stroke event? Is it just the feedback people get? Because I've heard it called the best bike packing route in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some really, really kind things said about this. Riders Leo Wilcox, who put together the women's rally events for Como last year, she said it's one of the best routes she's ridden. I mean, that's really high praise because she has ridden most of the big routes out there. I think it's very photogenic. I think one thing the Instagram has done great things for ride sharing, not in terms of necessarily the route sharing, but sharing the inspiration. Some really talented photographers. My friend Ben, who came on the first TNR, he's got some real talent with the camera, and it's a very photogenic route. You spend a lot of time up high in the Alps, dramatic views. The military tracks are in places, they're really sort of cut into the hillside, and there's some incredible places for photographs. I think the number of riders that have ridden the route now and shared those photos online, I think that's what's given it the reputation. The Transcontinental Race was the inspiration for it. So they had a policy where women riders would get automatic entry, and that was to encourage more women to race long distance bike events, and that seemed like a really good thing to do. The TNR is non-competitive. It's a social event. It's a big group tour, certainly not a race. And some feedback I've had from riders, men and women, riders saying that entering something that was a race felt a little bit daunting, but entering something like the TNR, which is a group tour, has had a lot of appeal. We wondered if by guaranteeing places for women riders, that would help even out the gender mix. Women are underrepresented in these events, and cycling is, I suppose, one thing I've been really aware of the last few years and talking to people about all of this is that the TNR started out from my group of friends, the guys that I ride with, my sort of social media contacts. So me as a white middle-aged male in the bike industry, it's only natural that it's going to spread out from my position within cycling, and without intending it to be that way, where I am within cycling influences what the event grows into, and I suppose it was the Black Lives Matter movements had a lot of us looking at all areas of life, and say cycling is it's a very minor part of how do I say this? Everything that was going on at that time, and all the questions that we were asking ourselves about what we see. I think it made a lot of us see our lives, the lives of others, quite differently. And cycling is just one of the things. Obviously for me, cycling's on my mind a lot. And one of the questions was, when you look at the start line of TNR, what I see is lots of people like myself. Why isn't cycling more representative? And there was some really good podcasts at the time and interviews with riders that were explaining why cycling isn't more diverse. So there was the questions about the gender mix at the time, but also cycling is very white male European. Pro racing, bike racing culture in Europe has influenced it. It's the same sort of thing, same as how the TNR came out of my group of friends' social circle within cycling. It's that's where it starts from, and it grows out from there. So I think it's a case of realizing that if you want to see these things change, you have to make the efforts to make that, to help that change along. It's it's a difficult thing to know where to start. I have to be honest. It's one of those areas where I think you realise you're not quite sure how to help that change happen.
Positive discrimination has had a fairly bad reputation in some ways, because you want people to be there for ability, but you still need to make it happen. So that's what my next question was: how are you managing to achieve it?
So with the women's the gender balance, it was simply a case of saying, women riders, you get an automatic entry. We need to have a ballot for places this year, or over the last few years, because there's a limit as how many riders we can have in Turin in one place without needing an events license. There's probably there's a realistic number that's, I think if we go beyond that, the event just gets too big and it loses the feel that it's in to have. It puts too much pressure on accommodation along the way. There isn't a lot of that time of year. So instead of having to go into the ballot for places, if we allocate a certain number of places to women 50%, or this year it's 50% allocation, previous years it was an automatic entry. That's one way of addressing balance there. And the point that was made to me about that is that the more women there are riding, the more women are likely to feel it's a safe space for them to ride within. We are talking about riding and camping out, bivvying out, situations that you or I would feel much more confident than some other people might in. So the safety in numbers and just the support of there being more other women to ride with in those situations was raised as a good thing. I think on the wider diversity point, it's simply been a case of having the right thing to do is to say that you want to make the events more diverse and to approach riders that represent. Again, social media is great for this. There are rider collectives who represent underrepresented groups within cycling, so that riders see that there is place for them. There are other riders like them. There are places for them within cycling, and to get in touch with those groups to say, this is an event that wants to see people like yourselves in it. If you would like to join us, the space is there for you. I think positive discrimination is the way to do it. If you make space for people and hope that they see they might not want to ride the event, they might want to do something completely different. But if you would like to, we'd love to see you there, and we'd like to for this to be an event that helps to present a slightly different image of cycling, especially when it's a very sociable, non-competitive event. And I think the wider the backgrounds of people you meet along the ride, whether it's where they're from, ethnic backgrounds, religion, anything like that, the wider the groups of people you meet, the more interesting the ride becomes. I think it's a great opportunity to spend time riding with people, or stopping in a cafe and chatting. And the more diverse the riders on the ride, the better the experience, I think. The best bike is the one that you've already got and the one that's comfortable for you. But if you want to use this event as an excuse to go out and buy a new bike, I'm not going to stop you. I think a bike that you're familiar with and that is comfortable, and take a bit more off-road riding that isn't necessarily a full-on mountain bike. Part of the reason for the routes being the way it is and the events being pitched the way it is I thought it'd just be great to have an event that wasn't aimed at road riders or gravel riders or mountain bikers. I mean, really, it's just a touring event. And I know touring isn't such a cool phrase these days. Bike packing is all the rage, and touring is a very similar thing, but doesn't have the same amount of focus. But you see people touring on all kinds of bikes, really enjoying what they're doing. The bike is secondary to the experience. Having the right bike, or having a comfortable bike, makes it a much more enjoyable experience. But whether that's an old touring bike or a mountain bike with some slicker tyres on, or a modern gravel bike is a great option.
Is there a minimum? I know that Marcus, when they're doing the dirt dash, they always and it has a similar ethos, even though it's over 2 days. They say you really want tires of 40 millimeters. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, if you're going to go off road on reasonable quality tracks, so this is not mountain biking, but some of them are quite rocky. I think a 40 to 45 mil tire is a good minimum. Personally, I'd rather be on something bigger than that. I tend to use, so far ridden the route mainly on bikes with 650B by 50 mil tires, and that's a good compromise, I think, between smooth, efficient rolling on the roads and some comfortable off-road. I'm going to try it on a mountain bike next time, I think. I think a 29 with cross-country tires would be a good way to go.
Mudguards? Fenders, as the Americans call them?
Personally, I always use mudguards on touring bikes on trips like this, just because when it rains high up in the Alps, it rains hard and it's cold. And some of the worst experiences I've had on the bike have been trying to descend mountain passes, wet and cold. And in that situation, mudguards make a huge difference. And just the amount of spray off the roads. And also, when it stops raining, the roads will still be wet for a few hours after that.
Flats or SPDs?
SPDs for me, although I think if I went on my mountain bike, I would take flats. I might do a bit of, I quite fancy doing some hiking along the way. So certainly there's some hiker bike tracks that we might be glad if we've got some boots on. I met Martin Schildkamp, who is the director, founder of Smart Shelter Foundation, which, Smart Shelter Foundation is a very small organisation. It's essentially Martin and his partner, with support from researchers that he works with. I met him in Nepal in 2008, I think it was. He was a Dutch architect who had gone out to Nepal to develop some ideas he had about building earthquake-resistant buildings using locally sourced materials. So a very manageable, sustainable way of putting together buildings that were earthquake-resistant. And I was just inspired by what he was doing and the ideas he'd had, and how his dedication to halting a successful architectural career to go out to Nepal to put into practice these ideas he had. And buildings, so schools that they built in Nepal survived the 2015 earthquakes, which sort of proved the theories. He's now researching, basically modelling and testing building techniques that use locally sourced rubble, often variable quality masonry and cement, with this banding technique. The banding technique's it's basically like layers in the cake. They would use the rubble, stone, mortar building techniques that they generally use there, and then they put in a horizontal band and then build on top of that. And usually 3 bands within a building seems to give it the stability from the earthquake.
And the rally is raising money for that. How?
We have patches, rally patches, and the route cards, which have information about the routes. Komoot support us with free Komoot access vouchers by voucher code on the cards. And the rally patches are like a memento of the ride. Those are sent to riders who donate to Smart Shelter. So if they make a donation directly to Smart Shelter, so 100% of their donation goes to Smart Shelter, we'll send them a route card and the patches as a memento. So that's one of the ways it raises funds for Smart Shelter. The other way is that the companies that sponsor us, primarily Komoot, they donate directly to Smart Shelter as well for the sponsorship that the TNR gives them in return. So everything is done direct to Smart Shelter. So it's a non-profit thing on the TNR side. I'd recommend that people take good quality, warm when wet type of clothing that isn't necessarily cycling gear. It's the sort of thing that you might buy if you're going hill walking or basic grade mountaineering even. But the route spends quite a lot of time above 2,000 metres, and 2,000 metres up in the Alps in bad weather is cold, wet, not a particularly pleasant place to be. So, and especially on a bike, if you're walking, I think being on a bike makes bad conditions worse. Or spray, there's potentially spray coming off the tyres. Riding downhill, the wind chill can get quite bad. Being up at 2,500 meters or above, some of your first instinct might be to descend, to try and get out of the worst of the weather and to find some shelter. But descending, you might be descending for half an hour to an hour because you're going slow. You need to take care on the corners because it's wet. Your hands are cold. You're not operating the brakes as well. I just found in the past that can be quite a potentially risky situation, and certainly a very uncomfortable situation. So I think most of us that aren't used to riding in the Alps can underestimate how quickly things can change out there and just how cold and uncomfortable, how quickly that chill can set in. Especially because a lot of us, cyclists are, quite a lot of us aren't carrying a lot of extra insulation ourselves. We might be packing light.
And yet it amazes me how light some of the bikes look.
Yes, yeah. I think there's a real focus in bike packing, particularly packing light, going light, because the lighter your bike is, obviously, the more you enjoy it. But there are a few things like a good warm jacket, spare gloves, things like that, or waterproof trousers even, that will sometimes get left out if you think, the weather forecast looks good. Yeah.
With that sort of thing in mind, could you do it? See, I haven't been to this part of the Alps that you go through. Could you do it with the refuges and places to stay along the way? Could you book places in advance and therefore leave a lot of your bivvy kit behind?
Yes, I think so. Some riders do. I think you need to be lucky with the weather, or you need to. Luck will come into it for sure. I think partly, first thing that's difficult, I think, booking accommodation is that unless you're quite confident in to cover the distance and the climbs, know the terrain, booking it'd be very easy to get out of sync with the bookings, or having to push on one day to get to the next refuge or the accommodation that you booked. And that in itself can put you in a situation where you're out in conditions that you don't want to be in and haven't prepared for because you've booked the accommodation. So it's certainly one way to do it, and quite a few riders have ridden that way.
Is it worth being a member of an alpine club or something to get the discounts at these places, or does it not really work that way anymore? I'm going back a long time.
The refuges on this route are not really the high alpine refuges.
Right.
They are, a couple of thousand meters up, but they're not generally used by climbers, so they're not the CF or anything like that.
So the more the tourist refuge that will be
they're hikers refuges, or agritourismos and those kind of places. So certainly it can be done, but I think it's a good thing to take a bivvy bag with some basic safety.
How about resupply in terms of food and fuel for any stove? Is that something you can get along the way?
Resupply is pretty good along this route. I mean, there's plenty of opportunity for coffee, pizza. The restaurants in the villages and the valleys are really good. The TNR itself in September, that's just outside the tourist season, so there are fewer places open than would be peak season, July, August, but still, there's very few stretches really where supply is an issue. There's water fairly regularly from water taps as well, so it's. I think it's a good route for.
And what's the gas you should be carrying if you're going to use a gas stove? Is it the blue camping gases?
Well, yes, they can be. I found they're harder to get hold of. Tend to use little alcohol stoves, so you can get like barbecue fuel, basically meths. You can get that from supermarkets and hardware stores in Turin quite easily. Whereas camping gas stoves, the sport, a decathlon or somewhere like that will have them. There's one of those in Turin as well. So whichever option you take, you should be okay.
You said the authorities require insurance. Is that correct?
the authorities in Turin set a limit on the number of people we can have in any one place.
Right.
It's a site of gathering for you.
Sorry, I was meaning for the riders. Do they have to have insurance in terms of rescue?
So I'd strongly recommend that anybody riding the route has their own personal insurance. Should you be involved in any kind of accident, whether if it's not your fault, insurance will help. If you were to go into the back of a car coming down a descent, or for all of those reasons, I mean the terms of entry of the TNR say you have to have insurance, your own personal liability insurance.
Water you mentioned. Do you need to purify it?
I think there's plenty of opportunities to fill water from taps. That you have water trough taps in lots of villages in the Alps. So I've never purified water that I've drunk out of one of those taps now. I've never had a problem. So this is one of the things that I cover in the terms of entry, trying to advise riders what they're getting into, because I think this is not a true wilderness experience kind of ride, but it would be quite easy to think, well, it's not competitive. It's a social touring event. It's a welcoming feel for the event, but it does take you up high in the Alps. It doesn't just take you to a high column and descend. You do stay up high for quite some time on some of the sections of the ride.
Higher than Ben Nevis, we should point out as well. You're over 2,000
so there's plenty of
meters
sections where you'll be at 2,200, 2,400 meters.
And the Ben's something like 1,300. So if you imagine riding your bike higher than almost twice as high as that for quite a while.
Yeah, that's it. And you could be up there for a number of hours as well. And also some of the tracks on the route, they're Jeep tracks that have been cut into the hillside a long time ago. So we've had to change the route because of landslides in the past. The weather is getting more extreme these days. You get storms and rainfall can be a lot more intense than they were in the past, more often. So certainly the number of areas that have been affected by landslips, landslides, damage like that throughout the year in the last few years, I've been aware of just by monitoring the route and getting rider feedback. It's surprising actually. So I think we have to be aware of when you're riding along a track that's cut into a hillside that's got cliffs above you and there's water coming down that when it's raining, that water, it's going to dislodge rocks. Rocks do, you see rocks covering the roads in places. And I think I suppose in terms of safety, what can you do? It's one of those, rock fall is something I think anyone...
Don't hang about. Don't think about stopping. Don't think about camping. Just get through it.
There's not a lot you can do to avoid that risk. So one of the things to do is just make riders aware that this is not something I think about when I'm riding in the UK. I don't expect to be hit by a rock from above when there's a 50-metre drop to the side of me, 3 or 4 feet away. That is a real risk in riding some of these off-road tracks in the Alps. So I think, although there's not so much you can do to protect against that, I think riders need to understand that is a risk when you're riding a route like this.
But do you tell people if there is a diversion on the route? I'm thinking now, let me get the Valdeva, Val di Sale options.
Yeah, so we've had to divert sections of the route because of either Storm Alex. We had to make some diversions to the route because of that, simply because the Roya Valley sections of it were destroyed, some serious damage there. So the repairs are ongoing. A lot of it's been put back together now. So we've never listed finishing times or a rank. There's no start and finish list of riders. There's no fastest known time for because there isn't one set route. If you want to say faster than anybody else, which route did you take? So the whole thing's been put together. Although in the early days, I was quite interested to think, what would a fast time on this route be? I'd be interested to know how quickly I could ride it because I enjoy that kind of cycling challenge for sure. But generally, I think the ride of the event is encouraging people to stop thinking about how many meters you've climbed that day, whether you Strava segments or being competitive on the bike, which seems to come a little bit too naturally to a lot of us. If you take all of those influences away, people slow down and realize that you're on the bike to see these places and to experience it, and speed and riding into the night and things like that can be part of the experience, but certainly not an essential part of it. So we did choose Turin to Nice originally, partly because of some great riding in between, but also because there are airports in Turin and Nice. And I have to say, my approach to travel has changed a lot in the last few years. I think what GB Duro do with having no-fly events is commendable. I really do. I would like the TNR to be something where people really think about their travel options. And I suppose it's, sorry, this isn't quite what you're asking, but I think the no-fly point or the travel side of it is quite important. I think I don't know if it's for me to say to people that flying is, obviously we all need to reduce carbon footprint for sure. Some people may only fly once every 5 years, and when they do, they want it to be an amazing experience, and the rest of their time they don't own a car, or they're generally living a very low impact lifestyle, but from time to time they want to do something like this. And my take on it is that's your choice. We would love the TNR to I'd like to encourage people to think about how they get there. One of the reasons that I've been less keen on flying recently, not just from the environmental impact side of things, is traveling with a bike through airports. It's just never a good experience. The doubts, or the worry that, is my bike going to be in one piece when I get it on the air belt at the other end? It's always a stressful experience for me. Traveling by coach or by train has always been better. It does take longer, and that's one of the real problems with it. If we were to insist on no-fly events, there are people who getting 1 week off work or 1 week away from family and commitments is not easy, and they might well be able to ride and enjoy the event in 5 or 6 days, and that doesn't give them a lot of time to travel at each end. So even then, taking the European Bike Express as a great coach service into Europe, you could then do a day or day and a half ride to Turin from one of their stop-off points. You could take the train if you had an extra day and a half each end to travel. There are ways to do it, and I really would encourage people to look at those options at least, but they're more expensive, they take more time, and time and money are things that not everybody has in abundance. So I certainly wouldn't say any of that to me, because I'm being critical of something like GB Duro having no-fly events, because I think by positioning yourself, by saying this is a no-fly event, it makes people think, well, why would you have a no-fly event? It reminds us all that bike travel and cycling is low impact, but if we jet off around the world 2 or 3 times a year to go and ride our bikes, that's quite different. So. But yeah, getting between Turin and Nice, one top tip is just get hold of or take some bin bags and some zip ties. I've travelled in that area before on the trains just by taking the wheels off my bike, turning the handlebars, zip tying it all together into a fairly small package so I can carry it by the handlebar, zip tying the rear derailleur up against the frame so it's safe, and then just covering it in bin bags and tape. So as long as the bike is easy to handle, it's covered, you'll get away with it being luggage on most French and Italian trains. So that's one way to do it.
Are you going to be riding it this year, or do you sit at home, or do you? I was going to say, do you dot watch but nobody's got trackers, so you don't know.
No, that's it. I really hope to be out there. I wasn't out there last year because of the travel restriction. There was 5 days quarantine needed. You could be in France for 7 days before and then go into Italy. We had to have 5 days quarantine in Italy, which made it impractical last year. But that's the only one I've missed. So every other year I've been out there riding.
So you still love it then, even after all this time?
Certainly, yeah.
It's that good a route.
It's one of those routes that I would happily ride over and over again.
And is it different every time?
It is, because there's route options and I'm riding with different people every year. So it's always a different experience. I think most of my tours I do in small groups or often go touring on my own as well. What the TNR has been different every year simply because I'll meet up with different groups of riders, or I'll travel out there with a group of riders to ride, and it's a different experience each year because of that. So and yeah, there's parts of the route that it's one of those routes I kind of miss sections of it after a while. I've got familiar with them, and I think, well, next year I'd like to go through there really early in the morning to see the sunrise from there, or that place that I passed last year at midday, that would be a great camp spot for another year. So I just try and time where I am along the route differently.
Thanks to James Olsen and to photographers Ben Mills and Cyril Polito. If you'd like to see some wild riding in Scotland, take a look around my channel while you're here, and I hope to see you in Turin. Until next time, bye.